If you are a parent with 1, 2, or more kids, imagine 10 kids. You know, life can be messy sometimes. Raising kids with all the distraction in this world, it can be so difficult to really connect with them and to really, have close relationships because we're all so busy doing stuff, lots of times good stuff, right? But we also know, if you've been listening to this podcast long enough, that we've got to have this deep connection with them if we really want to do this parenting journey well. So we wanted to bring on some guests who know what they're talking about raising 10 kids. That's right, 10 kids. It's Mike and Alicia Hernon from the Messy Family Podcast. And we wanted to have them on to share their tips about how they've learned over the past 2 decades raising these kids on how to be intentional with each of these kids, because it is a challenge. But I also want to add a little caveat to this episode. Sara and I, in doing these podcasts, we've always tried to do our best to give you the best quality product you can have, audio, visual if you're watching on YouTube, and we're always trying to improve that. But we're also about progress, not perfection, that we think that's part of our parenting model too. It's always about just growing and learning and getting better, but you're going to make mistakes. We're never here advocating for perfect parenting or acting like we're perfect parents. We mess up and we don't do things the way we'd like, and we learn and grow just like our kids do. And so this particular podcast, when we did it, we were excited, thought it had great content for you, but the audio wasn't quite up to par of what we'd want. So I hope you'll bear with us throughout this, where some of the audio is kind of spotty in certain places, but we did our best to clean it up to make it to where it still provides a lot of value for you and your family. So I hope you'll give it a listen, because I think you're going to get some great insight. And at the end, if you stay till the end, Alicia, she's going to really share some new insights that she's doing on how moms can better connect to their teenage daughters. And she's got some great tips on how to strengthen that relationship throughout the teenage years so that you too are able to create the relationship you want all the way into those adult years. So without further ado, I want to get to that interview. Take a moment, please, to rate, review, comment on this podcast, so that way more and more people have access to it. And I won't delay any longer. I hope you enjoy the interview with Mike and Alicia Hernon from the Messy Family Podcast.
Welcome to the Art of Raising Humans.
The Art of Raising Humans is a podcast designed to support, equip, and encourage parents on how to create long-lasting, deeply connected relationships with their kids that's free from fear and shame. Come join us on the journey. Hello, and welcome to The Art of Raising Humans. I'm Kyle.
Hey, and I'm Sara.
And Sara, families can be messy sometimes.
Yes, I can.
Do you agree? Like, I know we've got 3 kids, and it can be messy on the emotions, just the chaos, all that stuff, right? Could you imagine having 10?
No.
So I think having
beautiful, but
yeah,
no.
It would be beautiful. It would be so wonderful, but it'd also be kind of messier, possibly, right?
Possibly.
And so that's where today, listeners, we want to introduce you to a couple who's got a great podcast called the Messy Family Podcast. And I've already given the secret away. The reason why their family's so messy is because they've got 10 kids. They're raising 10 kids, and their ages from like in the 20s, right, all the way down to the teens now. So they've been through it. And so I want to welcome Mike and Alicia Hernon to the podcast. Hello.
It is great to be on the show with you guys.
And Kyle and Sara, you 100% could have 10 kids. It's not really that hard. You guys are so awesome. You should.
Yeah. Well, what we know is funny, Alicia. We did hear somebody told us that having 2 is the hardest. And they're like, once you're done with 2, when you get to 3, like it actually starts getting easier, because then we found that to be true. Then our oldest was now helping us with the youngest, and it was like, oh, right. This is so cool. Where it was just 2, it was like you had them, they were so young and they were so messy, and it was difficult to really like wrangle them. Whereas once you had 3, it was like, okay, now this oldest one can start helping with this, and it made it much easier.
For us, it was actually 3. 3 broke me. We went from man to man to zone defense, and everything changed. But for us, it got easier after 3.
Actually, I really think it's the question is how close together your children are.
Yes.
To be honest with you, I think it's more that because our first 3 were all like 16 months apart, so that's why we were like, it's all crazy. But I think that when they get older and if they're a little bit further apart, it does get easier. So we kind of like figured things out, and then our kids weren't so close together.
Yes.
So I kind of started spreading them out a little bit. But, when we had 4, it was just like, yeah, this is what we do. Like, we just acted, you know?
That's right. That's right.
People always think we're strange, so it's like, we're all in.
Yeah. Well, so you guys have been doing your podcast for a decade, right?
Oh my God. I can't even believe it when you say that. Yes, that's true. Yes.
Yeah. So you've been doing your podcast for a decade, and your kids, what are the ages of them again? Where do they range from?
Our oldest is 29, our youngest is 12, and we have 8 grandchildren now. And it's so great because having the grandkids, and 7 of them live in Steubenville with us, like they live in our town. So we get to see them a lot, but it's a really good reminder of how toddlers and infants, they take up so much energy. I when I have my grandkids over, I say to my daughter, how do you guys get anything done? Like, you forget so quickly. But it's so great to have them because it keeps us very fresh in relating.
That's the way to put it, fresh.
Fresh in talking to parents who have those age children like in the home right now. So it's a good reminder.
So what was the vision behind starting the Messy Family Podcast, the website, all the stuff you're doing? Kind of, where did that start from?
Well, first, just a brief background, right? So I come from a divorce family. My parents got divorced before I got into high school. And I think early on, I was just hungry for what is marriage and family, because I knew what I experienced in my home growing up. That wasn't what marriage is supposed to be like. This wasn't what the family that God designed, right? I didn't understand. And so I kept looking for mentors. I kept looking for what does this look like? I remember kind of couch surfing in high school, looking for the right parent, the perfect. And in my journey through some healing and so forth, through all of that, really led me to say, I think one of the greatest things we have to be a part of in this world is a family. And so that was early seeds planted because of my childhood. And I was really looking for a woman who wanted to have a beautiful family, right? And I found one who not only, she came from a large family as well. So we have 10 kids, but she came from a family of 10.
I'm the second of 10 myself.
It's totally crazy. Wow. Right?
Yeah.
But guys, this is part of our world domination plan. This is how we're going to take over. And but early on in our marriage, we did some marriage prep, and we led some couples Bible studies and different, like Gary Smalley videos, all these different things. But our heart was always oriented towards that. But then we had a bunch of kids, and we just focused in on our home life. And as we got towards in the last 10, 12 years, we had more and more younger couples coming to us asking for advice.
Right.
And they kept saying to us, "You guys need to do a podcast." And what was your response?
And I was like, "What's a podcast?" 20 years ago, I remember podcasts being explained to me. They're like, "It's like an internet radio show," and I was like, "Oh, well, all right." But Mike he's really techie, and so he just figured out how to do the podcast. And at the very beginning, when we started when our daughter Claire, who's our 10th, was 2 years old. Mike would be like, "Come on, we got to do the podcast today. We got to do the podcast." And I was like, "I don't want to do the podcast, because I'm so exhausted." But when we started doing it, honestly, it gave us so much life. It gave us so much life for us to kind of reflect on why are we doing what we're doing?
Yeah.
And just to really share with couples the wisdom that we were able to learn from other great sources. And so I feel like we've been learning and growing throughout the last 10 years, of course, and then we're able to share that with other couples. So we kind of see ourselves as like an older brother or sister, like we're not experts, we're not counselors like you guys, which we so appreciate. And we love pointing people to those. We're more like just practitioners, right? We are just a little bit further ahead than other people, and we can say, "Hey guys, here's things that we learned. Here's things that, hey, don't try this because this was messed up, or whatever, or here's our failures." But then here's some great resources, and kind of like helping triage people sometimes, because people, as you know, parents, it's really, really hard to be a parent today. I really believe this is one of the most challenging times, probably in the history of humanity, if you will, to be a parent because of such strong cultural forces. And we are just blessed to to come into contact with so many beautiful families, as I know that you guys are as well.
Yeah. Well, I think the challenge too in this day and age is also just the fast changes, when it comes to technology and we look at how much it's changed.
Yeah.
It's just like things were just so much slower. It was slower when we were growing up, we were running around outside for hours and, there wasn't always now there's so many ways kids are pulled to and fro from, a lot of it is opportunity, but it's all about what is the best as opposed to just what is a good or fun thing to do. What is the best thing to be doing with my time? And we really feel compassion for kids having to wrestle with that. I mean, even I was thinking this one kid was talking about being at school and he kind of was itching his nose. And some other kid took a video of that and then posted it about him picking his nose. And I was telling Sarah, back in the day, man, if someone didn't like you, they just said they didn't like you. But now they'll post it and everybody's laughing at it. And I'm like, oh my gosh, you'd be so anxious.
The constant pressure that you could be recorded at any moment. And
absolutely.
Trying to survive the day-to-day social dynamics and everything coming at them.
I remember
really
our
tough.
kids were so aware of it when they were little. There was one time a storm happened here in Tulsa, Oklahoma, and I was trying to get out of the storm. So I went to the mall because the tornado sirens were going off, and I got the kids over and they went inside and I went to park the car. It was a dumb thing. I don't know why I was parking the car, but and it was I went to go park the car and they were our oldest was only 6. And she ran in, she slipped because it was wet, and she hit her head a little bit. And
I wasn't with them.
Yeah, so she wasn't with me. It was
he
just
was
me.
Run inside because he wanted to get them safe.
But
while
of
he parked the car.
Yeah, but one of the things that Abby brought up was I wonder if somebody recorded that. I would have looked so dumb or something like that. It was
she was aware of it.
That was the first thing that came through.
Yes.
Wow.
What if somebody recorded me running in there? Yeah, and falling down.
Yeah.
In addition to what our kids have, the pressures they have, we as parents are being caught up into this. And what I would characterize as a tyranny of experts, right? Meaning on social media and throughout the world, it's not that we don't have enough information about parenting. It's just there's so much that it's I don't feel like I can ever measure up. But I feel like parents have always probably felt like failures on some level.
Yes.
But now I've got a million people telling me I'm doing it wrong. And that if you don't do this perfect way, you will irreparably, emotionally, psychologically damage your child for the rest of their lives. The pressure, So it's there's a lot going on.
Yeah.
Yes, I remember that feeling because even going to all the trainings and everything, I remember just thinking, okay, the first 3 years, we just really got to get those first 3 years right.
Yes.
And it is a lot, and it doesn't allow you sometimes space to just be a parent.
Yeah.
And you almost get there can be so much anxiety around it just to be able to relax and enjoy the process in the midst of trying to make it all perfect,
Yes.
Well, and even that's what I love about the name of your podcast, Messy Family, is obviously you've kind of embraced that in the same way we also tell people all the time. Anytime we do speaking, conferences or any kind of meeting with parents is I'm not trying to teach you how to be perfect. That's actually would be really unhealthy and actually really gross to be that's the goal, because it's just not the goal. The goal is to be able to embrace the good, the bad, the ugly, all those aspects. And that's really where beauty lies, is within that. So it sounds like you guys have learned to embrace that, right? That perfection isn't the goal.
Into it.
Your
kids forced you into it, right? The kids are
Well, it's kind of like what we were talking about before, Kyle. I think the answer for parents is take in the information, and then you kind of work on yourself, be the best person you can be, and then just go into parenting with confidence and humility. Those are the two things we talk about. Confidence and humility. And it's not about getting it perfectly right. It's about, I think that when parents, just the fact that they are listening to podcasts like yours or like ours, or they're availing themselves of resources, take it all in, but then you just have to sift through it. And just recognize that, hey, maybe you're not going to do everything right, but the fact that you're trying is almost a victory in itself.
Yeah.
Because there's so many people that don't even care, or that are not trying to be better people, know. But I think that if your focus is, you know what, I'm going to be the best person I can be, and I'm going to learn as I go. your kids are going to be fine. It's going to be fine because it's not about doing it perfectly. I feel like it's more about the process, the process of learning and repairing. And I can tell you, and I'm sure all of us feel the same, I look back on who I was before I had children. Yeah. Even who I was 10 years ago, I have changed and matured so much. Yeah. And it's because of my kids. Yeah. It's because of my kids, because they have taught me, right? The kids are teaching me in many ways about my own weaknesses, my own failures, where I need to grow. And as I grow, I can be a better parent. So it's not necessarily about, I do appreciate sometimes like learning different techniques and words to say and all of that. I appreciate that, but I also have to recognize that that's not where my children's emotional health is going to come from. It's going to come from me and if I am comfortable in who I am and that process of relationship and repair, so, and I know that you guys are preaching the same.
And I have to do it a lot too. So I have to do it a lot. But that's something we emphasize as well, that when I was a school counselor, the best teachers were the best learners. The teachers that were really not doing things well in the classroom were ones they thought they were just done learning, And so that's where I took that into our parent coaching that we do, of just that, like your stance for both of you is, I'm just it's really about a stance towards these situations. I'm here to learn from you, because how can I teach you if I don't know how best you learn, right? And in the same way, if that kid sees you as that receptive learner, then man, I remember, that would feel so powerful as a kid to go, you're willing and open to learn from me. I have something to offer you. That's awesome, because now it's not about me being perfect or you being perfect.
Exactly. That's so true. That's so true. And at the other part of this, it's like, it's not about it is about what we know, but people don't care. Was that old school, right? People don't know or don't care about how much you know until you know how much you care. Yes, completely. And it's like at the end of the day, I feel like what I have discovered after almost 30 years of parenting is that I've got to free myself up to love my kids more effectively. Yes. I thought I was actually a pretty good person until I had kids, and they were like a doctor, helping me identify, you've got an issue with anger. You've got to work on your impatience. And all of that helped bring things out and said, okay, this is about me being formed into who I am meant to be, becoming a parent that my kids need and want, because I realized I wasn't formed. And again, whether it be by background or by experience or just whatever, parenting is in some ways natural. In other ways, it's not an inborn skill. We can learn, we can grow. And I love that. If I look back, I would say this. One of the reasons we say messy too is that too many people look out at that perfect image, have this ideal of what they think the perfect parent should be. And we all feel we fall short. And we've got to accept where we are, but not accept it so that we wallow in it and don't change, because too many times we're measuring ourselves between the gap between where we are today and that ideal, as opposed to looking at the gain. Where were we a year ago versus today? Where was I 10 years ago, 5 years ago? Now, for us, 30 years ago, where were we? And I'm like, I'm actually on the right path. I've still got a lot of road to cover here, but the recognizing we're moving forward. It's about progress. It's about moving towards the ideal, not about attaining it per se, because that will give us stress, anxiety, and we will be grasping.
Sort of that embracing, I am not perfect. That's okay. That humility that you mentioned before of coming into parenting, that I am a work in progress and I'm doing that. So what was coming to my mind as you're saying that, it's hard to find that space. Like how I'm just trying to get lunch on the table and laundry done. And so with 10 people running around your house, how
10 possible ways to mess up.
how did you do that? Or do you have tips, or like how can I want to develop myself, I want to grow, how do I do that while I'm trying to just do each day?
Okay, so I'm going to tell you the secret weapon of an effective family. You ready?
I'm going to mark this. I'm going to mark this. Okay, go.
The secret weapon is your family culture. Okay. The culture within the home speaks more effectively than anything that you can do and phrase that you can say. It's like your operating system within the home. Right? It's like that operating system that's comprised of, and it communicates these expectations and beliefs and values, to your children, because it's the way that you live your life. And so in our home, part of our family culture, especially having so many kids, was that mom and dad are not the slaves of the home. Okay. Everyone contributes. We are all contributing to the upkeep. We are also all contributing to the love and affection that those kids need. So it's not just like, I have to provide for all of the emotional and physical needs for every child. No, that's first of all impossible, right? But I can create a culture within the home where people feel seen and known by me, but also by each other. See, that's the beautiful thing that I've experienced in growing up in part of a big family. Is like my brothers and sisters were such a huge part of my childhood. Like my parents, of course, I've heard this once said that parents like create the outlines of your life, but your siblings color it in, And so it's like my parents kind of decided that big thing. They set up the culture in the home, the structures, the boundaries. But then I was learning those things by interacting with my siblings. So when I grew up, and this is how we raised our kids, they're making lunch for each other. They're helping each other to do that. The big kids are watching the older kids, they're bathing their little brothers and sisters, they're reading them books and things like that, right? They're spending time together. My teenage sons, I know that they've had things that were really hard for them to go through. They're going to their older sisters, to look for that advice. They're looking to their older brother. And so it's a beautiful community. But the thing is, that didn't happen by accident. Mike and I had to be very intentional about what we communicated to them, how we taught them forgiveness, how we would spend time together as a family, how we relate to each other, right? Like they're watching that and they're modeling that, what your marriage is like. And they're watching how we relate to each one of the children. So it's this beautiful way that really the Lord provides for families by giving us each other so we can all be working together. And so I think when you have that space and you are living a life of somewhat of order, you have to have prioritize things within your life.
You can't have it all, right? And that's the reality. Is that and I don't mean to, because it's hard whether you have one kids or two. The number doesn't necessarily always factor in. It's not an exponential growth, in that regard. But for every one of us, we need to make decisions about what are we going to communicate to our kids. What is our culture going to communicate to our kids? And you have to say yes to certain things, and then protect that yes with 1,000 no's to other things. My yes to say our family is going to be ordered. It is going to be a little messy in some areas, but we're going to say what's most vital. Our marriage, us as a couple saying we have a vision of where we're going. We don't have it all figured out, but we have a vision of where we're going. And then the sooner we can kind of implement that in our home. Because for us, knowing that our family isn't a child-centered home, it's not, but the primary relationship is our marriage. And that out of that, our kids, and again, part of it is coming from my own background of divorce, but recognizing I want my kids to have the safety and the surety that our marriage is that fixed point in their life, that they don't have to worry.
What I hear you say, Mike, is like the foundation. So it's like the foundation that the house is going to be built on. And if that foundation is cracked or unsettled, then even if we build a beautiful house, it's all going to fall apart. So the kids are going to feel less anxious. I remember, Mike, something that whenever I was getting training in the parenting work I do, Dr. Becky Bailey, she came out of left field with this statement of said, if you want your kids to know how to do healthy conflict resolution, that isn't taught by how you do it with them. It's actually taught with how you do it with your spouse. Because she says that the kid is watching you and how you do it with mom or dad. And they're going like, oh, that's how I'm supposed to do it. Like, it's all fine and good how mom and dad do it with me, but that's really how it's done. And so that was kind of like a wake up call for me, that I'd gotten kind of sloppy in how I did it with Sarah. And I'd been like super focused on doing it right with the kids, but I like had let myself start raising my voice when I'm talking to Sarah more, started being more like, critical. And I was like, man, that's right. The kids are watching. And if I want them to someday have healthy relationships, healthy marriages, I would really need to make sure the skill is being practiced here and then transferred to them.
Yeah. You know what I realized just like 2 weeks ago, that many of the ideas of gentle parenting, we need to do gentle marrying.
Yeah.
We need to take those ideas and use them with our spouse. They're the ones that really need that, and to walk with them, So anyway, it's so funny that you said that, because it's like, so many things that we focus on doing with our kids.
Yeah.
But it's really modeling that with our spouse is really so important.
And we go on and on. We don't have a problem talking. So
I remember this when you said that thing about the siblings too. That really has been such a beautiful part of what we've seen happen in our home as well. It's not that we had horrible relationships with our siblings, but the closeness and the openness our kids feel. And I remember seeing it when they were little. Something that we would do when they had big emotions and they were getting dysregulated is we had a space in our home where we would go there to be able to kind of do some deep breathing, calm down. There's activities that they could do to help them kind of regulate themselves. And sometimes our oldest, Abby, was just resistant to that. She didn't want to go back there. She was mad and she wanted to stay there. Yeah, she's just like, I'm not going to let go of this, right? And so some of that, like, Abby, come on, Abby, let's go back and let's, and she, I'm not going. And then her 2-year-old little brother would say, Abby, will you go with me? And then Abby every time would say, yes, I'll go with you. Because it was kind of like they would go back there and like Brennan would be helping her take some deep breaths. And I was like, so interesting, because really there was no power struggle between them. The power struggle between me and her. And then I was thinking, that is so cool that this was an unintended consequence where we were teaching the siblings how to help each other. Yes, rather than like in my home, I was looking at how to get my sibling in trouble. Because if my sibling got in trouble, then that meant mom and dad were happier with me. They'd be like, let's take me out and get that special treat for me because I didn't do that thing he did. Right. So you were always kind of looking at the other one to fail rather than looking for how can I help you succeed. Yeah.
Right. And that is part of your family culture, right? Yes. You define that, whether you did it with great intention on the front end, like we talked about having 10 kids. How do you do it, right? We make sure our kids are not one of the herd. And again, that can happen whether you're just busy and have one kid or you have 10 kids. We're all busy. And it's a matter of taking time and saying, I want to spend special time one-on-one just with you. Yeah. And there's not to be a ton of time, but it has to be intentional. Yeah. And communicate something that you are valued, you are my beloved child, and that I care about you, right? Yeah. And what we didn't realize, and we didn't have this as part of our intention, is that as our kids have gotten older, they have repeated that with their younger siblings, so that when they came back from college or when they're adult, married themselves, they still take time to be with their younger siblings. Right. And they're loving on them. So the beauty of having all these crazy kids that definitely make some messy times is that there's a whole much more love to go around that fill in, because we're imperfect, and now we've got more people to replicate, if you will, that love in our home, which is awesome.
That is good.
Yeah, that's really beautiful, because that was one thing I wanted to ask you is like, how does, I feel like in a group that size, because even in a smaller family, you feel like voices can get lost. And how what would you say to parents, how can they make sure each child is heard? How do they get heard and know that they're contributing to this family culture you're trying to create?
And like we told you, this is coming from 2 middle kids who it was easy for us not to be heard. So we're like, what about their middle kids? How are they being seen and heard?
Well, first I'll just say this on the front end. we're messy because we're imperfect, right?
Yeah.
We're messy in part because we're still working on it.
Yeah.
But you do your best to set up systems to make sure people on a regular basis are being reached out to. And so we try to create, and again, at our ideal moments, we're having regular family meetings, right? Simple time where we're visiting with all the kids. We go through, hey, what were you most proud of? What would you regret? What would you want to do differently? Just to kind of share their hearts and say, what was the hardest this week? Just to give them the opportunity. And when we start young, when they're teenagers, they're very comfortable with sharing their heart. Right? So that their siblings as well as us are hearing that, right? But we also add into our evening prayers a time for forgiveness, because every one of us, parents included, we mess up. And it's not the fact that we do mess up or we don't hear somebody, we miss them. It's that we've created an environment where it's expected that we're going to repair that relationship, that we're going to seek forgiveness and restore. Because we've had an adult child come to us and say, hey, when I was young, you missed out on this. And it was hard to receive. Yeah. And but what the beauty was that I perceive is that we created a safe enough place for them to come forward, and that we're intentional about looking for it, but we're also creating an environment where that's the natural disposition. And we make it very clear from the front end that we aren't perfect, but we want to know, we want to be in relationship. We want you to be seen and heard. And we have enough investments of special time, of group time, of working through junk together, that they have the confidence to bring that up at some point.
And I feel like we have different routines and rituals within our home. Yes. Like for birthdays, we go around and everyone is honored for their birthdays. Like basically every sibling, every person who's there honors and says, I love you because, I'm, happy birthday. I want to honor you because, and then think of something specific, and that's such a beautiful time.
Mostly ending with crying, which, doesn't not natural for everybody.
And then we have family dinners, I know this is like a basic thing of families having dinner together, but it's so powerful. That is our time for everyone to be seen and heard, people sharing highs and lows, of their day, working together, doing chores together, having a ritual throughout the week that, okay, Saturday is going to be the day that we do chores or go to people's sporting events, but then Sunday is family day, right? That's the day that we're going to go to a museum, we're going to go to a park, we're going to stay home and watch football, like we're going to play games, or all of those rituals that you create within your home gives all of the kids that opportunity to be seen and to be related to, and to really feel loved. And then, like Mike was saying, there's that special one-on-one time. But I think that when you start creating those systems or rituals or routines or whatever you want to call them, you have to have a rhythm of life in your home and live life intentionally. Don't just let life happen to you, because then, yes, it is chaos. And I've known people from big families who did not feel seen and did not have a good experience growing up with a big family. Absolutely. But you know what? I've also met people from 2 kids, 3 kids. But also didn't have it, so I'm like, I'm beginning to think that maybe it doesn't.
It's not the size.
Maybe it's not the size, maybe it's the intentionality. So yes, either way.
That's good. Well, and I'd love for you to take a moment. I know we talked before we got together to do the podcast about how you're starting something new where you're really wanting to help moms kind of do that, create some of these things where their teenage daughters and them can really. So if you could tell more about that, well, what are you doing now?
Yeah, and actually this is really growing out of a tradition that I had growing up with my mom and that I've continued with my daughters to help them feel seen and known. And that is taking time to talk to them when they're between the ages of like 10 and 12 years old about the changes that come in adolescence. And so this is a mother-daughter experience. And so then we took that experience that I did with my kids, my daughters, and made that into a course, an on-demand course that's available for any moms and daughters to do. They get a workbook for mom, a workbook for daughters. And the idea of this course is to set mom up as a trusted guide for her daughter throughout adolescence. Because you know what? I'm not going to be there, right? Mom is going to be there. I go through, it's a 5-session course
Yep.
And we go through explaining the changes that happen in adolescence physically, but also socially. We talk about emotions. We talk about fashion. We talk about beauty, all of those things. I introduce the topic talking to the daughters, but then throughout the time, I'll say things like, okay, let's pause and have a conversation with mom. Why don't you ask mom about her experience growing up? Why don't you ask mom about her personal style? All of this. So I kind of like guide the conversation, but really the goal is to introduce these topics for mom, just so kind of a very systematic way, but to set her up as that trusted guide for her daughter. And I've done the course live on Zoom for about 4 or 5 years. Throughout that time, gotten lots of great feedback from moms, really refined and honed in on this course. And now it is available on demand at messyfamilyproject.org.
That's awesome.
Nice.
That's so good. Yeah. And I know for all the listeners, we will provide that link. It'd be great. You're going to give us that link. It'd also be good to have a link too, to where they could get that family culture thing. Cause you also have that, right? You also have a PDF.
Yes.
We want to make sure we provide that. And I want to say, kind of in wrapping up, I know several times you guys have inserted faith into the conversation, right? So I know Messy Family is a Catholic, it's very Catholic oriented, right? Your faith is very important to you and what you do with your kids, right? And so I wanted to ask you, why is that so central to what you do with your kids? Why is that so important to you? Why are you passionate about that? Because I know there's a lot of different ways you could have done it, but making that a central piece, how come that's a value you have?
For me, as I mentioned about my divorce family growing up, I had an issue with who God was as Father. And the fact that God has chosen to reveal himself as a father to us, I believe that I couldn't, and I think this is true for all of us, that we can't measure the ideal against another human. We need to say our desire, what our kids need is more than what we can bring to the table. Right. And for us, understanding who God the Father is and that I am first his beloved son allows me to be a father that I could never be to my children, because now because there really are a priority of the order of identity, meaning before you were a husband or wife, before you were a mom and a dad, you were a son or daughter. And knowing that we are a beloved son or a cherished daughter gives me freedom to walk into this marriage as a full man, to have the blessing of God the Father on me. And knowing his delight and his love for me frees me up to love my wife in a way that I couldn't. And then together to share that with our kids. We believe that that's God's plan. We believe that is integral to how I view the world.
And Mike, I think if I can tie that into what Alicia said earlier too, going into parenting, I think it's where faith can be very helpful, is that confidence with humility, right? I really think when you're able to perceive and understand something bigger than you, that loves you unconditionally, that accepts you as you are, right? Like that can be a very humbling standard to them be able to, like, in what ways am I modeling that kind of love? Right. And so that kind of love when connected to faith, because Sara and I obviously don't discuss it a lot on the podcast, but faith is an important piece of our lives. And that to me is always kind of going back to that standard of like, man, somebody loves me completely, all of my ugly parts, and isn't saying like, go clean yourself up and then I'll accept you. Instead it's like, no, I accept you just as you are. I mean, that's and so for us, that was very pivotal, especially when the kids were very little, and it was like, what does it look like to love this little human? And how do we teach them that by modeling that with each other? It's like, oh, well, there is an example that we through faith believe that somebody has loved us that way. Okay, so that looks like, oh, and when this kid is throwing this tantrum right now and freaking out, how do I model that love right now? Right. And so many times I would think, Mike, when I've been throwing a tantrum as an adult, how did I feel like unconditional love interacted with me? Well, it never pushed me away. It never said, I'm sick of that. Like it always, like, I feel like that love embraced me. And so I'm like, oh, how could I do that with the kids to where they're really comfortable growing up in a family that believes unconditional love is possible? Yeah.
Right.
Amen.
And ultimately, at the end of the day, we can never give our kids everything they need.
Yes.
We can't, because we are going to fail. I know that I have failed, because my parents, as great as they are, they failed me. Parents always fail. Yep. Ultimately, our children's self-worth is going to come from the fact that not just that they're our beloved son or daughter, but they are beloved of God. And God will never leave them. Someday, please God, I want to die before my children, right? I want to die way before them. And then I want them to know, even if I'm not even on this earth, that they are loved, that they are loved unconditionally and fully by their Heavenly Father, who will never leave them, never forsake them. That is the greatest gift that we can give our children, is a relationship with their Heavenly Father. And we get to our Heavenly Father through the merits of Jesus Christ. So yeah.
Well, we want to thank you so much for coming on and sharing this. Can you tell them all the ways they can find you? Where can they find more info if they're interested in hearing what you're doing?
Yeah, so our podcast is on any platform out there, whether it be Apple or Spotify or wherever. Messyfamilyproject.org has all the information about whether it be our podcast, our free downloads, whether it be on family culture, family board meeting, the courses. Alicia talked about the Women Wonderfully Made, as well as other courses that we offer out there, as well as our marriage getaway retreats that we do. All of it is available at messyfamilyproject.org.
Good. Thank you. Yeah. Thank you so much for taking the time. I'm sure you've got a lot of kids to get back to.
Hey, that's right. We like to keep it messy. It's on brand for us.
That's right. That's right, guys. So thank you. And we will be on your podcast soon. So anybody listening, if you want to check out that conversation, go check out Messy Family. You can hear that interview in the next month or so. So thank you, guys. We'll see you. The Art of Raising Humans podcast should not be considered or used as counseling, but for educational purposes only.